So I'm here with Eric Simon. He's got this fascinating documentary, What to Do About Climate Disruption, at our festival, Fusion Festival in London. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, I've seen the film. As always, just give us a brief synopsis of it, please, Eric.
So the point of my film really is to get beyond the acknowledgement that the climate crisis is happening,
Yeah.
and to get more specific into the aspects of how we're planning on dealing with it, trying to capture as many points of view, capture lots of voices, to, I would say, get beyond the whining that's related to the climate crisis and actually the thinking about doing.
Yeah, because it's interesting. I know everyone's going about, is it Greta Thunberg, the young activist, the
Yeah.
Swedish, but which I applaud her for bringing it to making people more aware. But a lot of people are saying, well, that's all very well and good, but we need a solution. We need an answer to what we're going to do. And
She's very young.
she's very young, but
And
I'm just
then-
using that as an example, of
No,
course.
it's a good example, and I think she's been a sort of a spokesperson for the fact that this crisis is happening and that our political leaders are failing us and that we need to act. But she doesn't have the knowledge base to really
Yeah, the science.
consider what it is how we're going to approach it.
I totally agree with what you're saying. I mean, I worry though that I've looked into this and listened to lots of opinion, and I am concerned that are we beyond the tipping point? That's my worry. That have we already gone too far, or if we haven't, we must be really close to being there.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the tipping point is it's all relative. If you play the story out, if we were going to do this sort of science fiction film based on fact, where we continue in this mentality of just using fossil fuels and not shifting our way of leading our lives, probably we'd get to a point where more and more of the planet would be uninhabitable. We would get our population reduction out of people dying and people not having less place to live.
Yeah, sea
And
levels
at that
rising,
point,
guess,
there would be like, okay, we can't reinvent the world as we had it before. We're now down to 300 million people on the planet, for instance.
Yeah.
And now we're going to start everything over, and we'll be living in little patches of land in what is now Greenland or that kind of thing. So, to say it's a question of what kind of damage are we going to sustain. I would say that. And then the other point that I think is all too much understated in the climate discussion is the fact that humans are destined to survive, in my opinion, but it's just all the four-legged creatures that they're not going to be able to get out of the way.
No, they reckon it's something like 1.2 billion animals in Australia have been wiped out with the forest fires.
That's a good example.
Yeah. And I think that's going to get worse. I mean, I know people that live in Australia, and I know they traditionally have this weather, but this is feels pretty unprecedented, where it started so early and it goes on so late, and it's just, and even I can feel it. I was talking to someone the other day, I can remember Christmas not that long ago, where it's cold, but I've also experienced Christmas in the last 2 or 3 years being 18 degrees. Well, that's not right on Christmas Day. That's not how it should be. And you can't, okay, maybe it is once or twice, but it's been a few times, and I'm kind of, well, there's something not right for it to do that, because it should be cold.
So in my film, I avoid the discussion of, oh my God, it's the fires are burning.
There's this catastrophe.
Yeah, we're just like, okay, humanity is faced with a monumental challenge, and let's just take this on. Let's see how we can approach it. And all of that for me gets very repetitive. We just went to this glacier, which 30 years ago was like
10 miles high, now it's 2 miles or whatever.
Exactly. So that's not the subject of my film.
Yeah, actually, that's a fair point. I was listening to something on Radio 4 the other day, and they was talking to a climate specialist, and they were talking about this break-off of ice in the Antarctica, and it plays into exactly what you're saying. And the guy, Evan Davis, I think, was interviewed saying, within 20 years, it's going to be a 1 metre rise. And then he said, well, what will happen if all the ice melted? And she said, oh, it will rise by 58 metres. But there was no hesitation. But you're quite right, there was no kind of, well, what's the solution? It was what is happening.
I consider that a safe place. Like there's the consensus. There's the people say, oh, look at all these deniers. We are the good ones. We are accepting, we are acknowledging this fact. But then you talk about Greta Thunberg, she herself acknowledged, look, my climate strikes haven't reduced emissions. We're still on the same path.
Yeah.
So.
But hers is more about awareness, I guess, isn't it? As you say. As in, people are being made constantly aware of because she's not bringing any solutions.
Well, that's what I'm saying. She's certainly doing more than her share for a little 16-year-old.
Yeah.
17 in that case. But anyway.
So what drove you to it? Because I've seen lots and lots of data about climate change, lots of programming about climate change, but I guess you thought there's something missing, hence the reason you decided to do it.
Well, see, like you referred to my first film about wolves, I see documentaries as a good way of focusing on an issue which just doesn't make the news. And while climate makes the news, it's in that context that we were just talking about. It's in the context of observation of the changes, the actual nitty-gritty of how do we approach this problem? Does a carbon tax make sense? What does all this carbon credits mean? All that, it just doesn't make the news. And so I think it's a very sort of obviously important topic and not something that gets the attention that it ought to get.
And in the US, because we all know that the climate accords that Trump has obviously pulled back from that. But what's the overall feeling about all of that? Because I haven't got a point of reference to how people's opinions are. I know it's in the film, I get that, of course, but in general, when you speak to people, are they concerned in the US in general about what's going on, or are they just like, well, whatever? What's the general feeling?
Well, I would guess there's less awareness than there is in Europe, and it's less front and center, but it's very much there. There was a big move towards this Green New Deal, which I can talk about a little bit, but
no, please do. No, interested in it.
So, let me just say, so first of all, I think that you're interviewing me more as somebody who has learned a lot about climate through the project, rather than me as a filmmaker who's putting together film about anything, So I wanted just to say that my role, for me as a filmmaker, I'm trying to capture voices. I'm not trying to be the omniscient narrator here, bringing you the truth as I see it that needs to be implemented and so forth.
No, I get that.
At the same time, I feel, I did come in starting the project with more than average knowledge on the topic. I have a master's in environmental management. I worked in the air quality for a state air quality agency for 5 years. I followed the climate topic for a good amount of time, and I would say that what I would think is important for me as like trying to be a responsible citizen, if I could boil down the problem that is not acknowledged, the problem behind the problem. In other words, the climate crisis to me is in a way a manifestation of a problem. It's a manifestation of what I consider to be perverse economic incentives. If I go to buy an electric car, it costs me substantially more than if I buy the equivalent car as a gasoline vehicle.
Same in the UK, even with the subsidies.
So you have a lot of incentives, but the fact is, if you had an adequate number, the adequate incentives, you'd have a lot more purchase of electric vehicles.
Agree, yeah.
So where we are now is really a state where you as a citizen are being penalized for doing what's good for the planet, and you are being rewarded for making a decision that's bad for the planet, and that dynamic is unsustainable.
Yeah, I read somewhere that for every one electric car that's sold, 30 SUVs are sold. Which is quite an astonishing
that's
stat.
An example. So you look, again, as a filmmaker, if I had been able to handle the logistics, I would have wanted to film a segment in Norway, because in Norway, what they're doing makes a lot of sense. It's not like the only way to do it or anything, but it's you buy a gasoline car. A gasoline car would cost 19,000 euros, and while the equivalent electric car would cost 29,000 euros.
Yeah.
What do? They put a 12,000 euro tax on the gasoline vehicle. They use that money to fund electric vehicle infrastructure, to fund other environmental programs, and lo and behold,
everyone goes electric.
People buy electric. Like during a month last year, there were more electrics than gasoline vehicles purchased, and they're way ahead of all of Europe in terms of percentage of electric vehicles used. And it's not because people have this sort of Norwegian affection for electric vehicles, is they got policy there
that's going to change. Yeah.
So, with respect to the Green New Deal, what I think is that they have all these ideas of programs they want to fund.
Yeah.
But what they're not looking at is coming in and saying, okay, well, where are we going to get this money? There's an obvious place to get it. You get it by levying fees on everything that's detrimental to the environment. So that accomplishes two things. It's your source of revenue, and it's a disincentive to continue doing what's bad for the planet. So that's where I think the Green New Deal is too much ideas for expenditures, but no idea for balancing that budget.
So the problem in the UK with going electric is the infrastructure is not in place. So that's a big problem. So for instance, if you buy an apartment here, a flat as we called it, where's the power going to come from? How's that going to be done? Because the space doesn't exist in the country to have these charging points, you see. So you can't put one outside when you can look around here, for instance. There's not the space there to put the charging points. So I don't quite know how they would do it. That's something they've got to tackle, but that's a problem that's got to be looked at, and there in itself is, I can't remember what the take-up we need to have in the UK, something like we need to build 10,000 a day, something ludicrous for the next 20 years in order to match what the consumption will be. That's just not going to happen anytime soon. And that in itself is, I'm just saying, that in itself is a problem, and that is indicative of the struggle that we're facing that should have been looked at and is now, they've been looked at late, and it's difficult.
But that's solvable. It's a question of communities having the awareness to put pressure on their elected officials to make the accommodations.
I mean, maybe. I mean, it's hard to know how that would happen when you have all this area. I'm sure it's the same in Hong Kong or any other major city, built up flats, going up high rises, and there's only a very finite amount of space at the ground level.
Well, you ought to look at Hong Kong then, because Hong Kong, second to Norway, has the highest percentage of electric vehicles of anywhere, and it's a close second.
Right.
Nobody's close. So I don't know how they're doing it, but that's a good model. Look, getting away from the specifics, I think for in terms of solving the climate crisis, having the blueprint, the correct policies, that's like one aspect, and obviously it's a very important aspect. But then once you have the little piece of the silver bullet that's going to help us on the right track, the second part of it is you have to think about where is that going to be implemented? Do we implement it through policy changes in Brussels or in London, or certain policies can be handled at the county level? When you're talking about electric vehicle infrastructure, that can be handled in your own city, and you go to your city council, you pressure. So you have to think about where the changes that needs to be made is implemented.
Yeah.
And then the third part of it is you have to have the popular support for the awareness that's going to overcome the opposition that you're going to inevitably encounter.
Yeah, of course you are. Yeah.
From all the people and businesses that have a self-interest in continuing to destroy the planet.
Yeah.
So it's all three of these things, these aspects. Like when you go into, you think, well, what really is the solution? Well, the solution also involves where you're going to implement it, how you're going to communicate that, having the support. that you need for that.
And you know, and I know I do this all the time, so I've got slightly away from your film here, but I know the message you were trying to achieve with it. I mean, how would you start the process? I'm using this film, of course. How do you plan to make this film? And what are the steps? You know, from A being the beginning
Of the filmmaking.
Yeah, to the finished. You know, the research, for instance, the people you need to speak to. Do you have a set way of making a film that you take to every film?
It's very sort of what today I can do and what today I can add. So it's like, for instance, for this film, it starts out like the climate crisis is different from the prior film in that there are so many public events that happen relate to it. So I want to be able to attend public events, seek permission to film at those events. That's one aspect of it. And another aspect is finding individuals who I can interview, who have some degree of knowledge about the topic. Then there's, during that downtime when I don't have events to attend, when I don't have like yesterday's filming to go through to see what's worth keeping and all that, then I can be doing my research to find out like who might be worth interviewing, or where there might be an event, or also I incorporated in this film a certain quantity of Creative Commons videos on YouTube where you have the right to use it.
Yeah.
So where that fits in. And then there's just all the thinking about what's important, what's relevant to what I'm trying to get across in the film.
Listen, it's a fantastic film. I really enjoyed it, and I love your passion. And it's there on screen, and I applaud you. I really do. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.